The utility company buried lines through his best field. A single old map made them move every when the stakes appeared overnight. That was the first problem. Clayton Birch found them on the morning of the 14th of April, 1981, walking his north field before breakfast. Surveyor's stakes. Orange flags. A straight line of them running corner to corner across the best 40 acres he owned. He was 61 years old. Had farmed the same ground in Caldwell County, Missouri since 1947. He counted the stakes. 11 of them. Dead through the middle of the field. He pulled one up, looked at the tag, set it back. The flags were surveyor's plastic, the orange faded already on the south sides where the sun had hit them. Each stake was a fresh-cut lath, the pines still pale at the cut. Driven hard. Somebody had come through with a crew while he slept 300 yards away and put a line across his ground and never knocked on his door. The frost was still on the lower grass. Clayton stood in it a while. The cold came up through his boots, and he let it. The field was his best, and he knew exactly why. The North 40 sat on a bend of bottom ground above Shoal Creek. Black soil, 4 feet deep in places, laid down by 1,000 floods before his time. It grew corn when the rest of the county grew disappointment. In 1980, a drought year, the North 40 made 130 bushels an acre, while his upland made 60. That field was the difference between a good year and a bank meeting. Clayton had buried 2 dogs and 1 understanding at the edge of it. He knew its every wet corner. The stakes ran straight through the heart of it. He drove to town that afternoon. The flags belonged to Tri-County Electric Cooperative. The woman at the front desk in Kingston told him a transmission line was going in. A buried line, she said, like that made it better. Said a right-of-way agent would be in touch. Said it as though Clayton should be pleased to hear it. The agent came on a Thursday, late April. His name was Garrett Lyles, maybe 40. Drove a company Buick with a clean dashboard. Spread a map on Clayton's kitchen table and explained the route. The cooperative was running a buried distribution feeder from the Hamilton substation to a new line serving the county's northwest. The straightest path ran through Clayton's North 40. Lyles said the word easement several times. Said the cooperative would pay $1,100 for a permanent strip 30 feet wide. Said the trench would be backfilled and Clayton could farm right over it. Clayton asked how deep. Lyles said 40 inches. Below the plow. Clayton asked what happened to 4 feet of topsoil dug out and put back wrong. Lyles said it settled. Clayton said it settled into a ditch that drowned corn in a wet spring and starved it in a dry one. Said a trench through bottom ground was a scar that never fully healed. Lyles wrote something on a pad. Said the route was determined by engineering. Said the cooperative had the power of eminent domain if it came to that. Said it pleasantly, the way a man mentions the weather. Clayton did not sign anything. Lyles left the map. Drove off in the clean Buick. The first letter came in May, a formal notice of the easement and the offer. $1,100. Clayton put it in the roll-top desk in the front room. The desk had been his father's, the drawer already stuck halfway. The second letter came in June. Same offer. A line added at the bottom about condemnation proceedings if agreement could not be reached. Clayton read that one twice, put it in the desk with the first. He talked to a lawyer in Hamilton, a man named Pruitt, who did wills and deeds. Pruitt read the letters. Said the cooperative was within its rights. Said eminent domain for utility easements was settled law in Missouri. Said Clayton could fight the price but not the route. Said fighting the price would cost more in fees than it would win. Charged $40 for the hour and meant it kindly. Clayton drove home. Did not sign. That night Margaret asked him what Pruitt had said. Clayton told her. The co-op could take the route. They could only argue the price, and arguing the price would cost more than the price. Margaret had kept the farm's books since 1948, in a ledger with a cracked spine, and she knew what the North 40 was worth better than any agent in a clean Buick. She did the figure out loud. The Bend made roughly 70 bushels an acre, more than the upland. Across the strip the trench would ruin, that was maybe 400 bushels a year, gone, for as long as the scar stayed wet. At $3 corn, that was $1,200 a year. The co-op was offering $1,100 one time for damage that would cost him that much every season after. Clayton sat with that number a while. Then he said the thing he'd been turning over since April, that the engineers had drawn their line on a map that didn't know the field, and that he had spent 34 years learning the field. Maybe, he said, the field was on a map somewhere too. A better one. He just had to find it. Margaret said maps didn't move power companies. Clayton said this one might, if it was right. And they were wrong. The cooperative scheduled the trenching for September, after harvest. That gave Clayton the summer. He spent part of it angry, and most of it thinking. The thinking was the useful part. He kept coming back to one thing Lyles had said. The route was determined by engineering. The straightest path. Clayton had farmed that bottom for 34 years, and he knew the North 40 was not a blank rectangle on a map. It had a high spine of ground running along its west edge, dry and firm even in April. And it had the wet bend along the creek where the black soil was deepest and the water table closest. The engineers had drawn their straight line corner to corner, right across the wet bend, because on their map the field was flat and featureless. Their map was wrong. Clayton was sure of it. He just needed to prove it. He started in the courthouse basement in Kingston. The recorder of deeds led him into the back room where the old plat books were shelved, dust and leather and the smell of paper going soft. Clayton was looking for his own deed, the metes and bounds, anything that described the field as it actually lay. He found his deed, found his father's before it, from 1947. Found the original land patent from 1839, signed in the name of the United States, granting the quarter section to a man named Absalom Ford. None of it showed what he needed. Acreage and boundaries, no detail inside the lines. He went back the second day and pulled the tax assessor's plats, then the road district surveys. Then a set of bridge and culvert drawings from the 1920s, hoping a creek crossing might show the lay of the bottom. The bridge sheets came close. They showed Shoal Creek's channel and a note about flood stage. But they stopped at the road. They didn't reach into the field. The clerk, an older woman named Eunice Tharp, watched him work for 3 afternoons. On the third, she asked what he was after. Clayton told her. A utility wanted to cut his best ground, and he wanted to know the ground better than they did. Eunice thought a while. Said there was another set of records most people never asked for. Down in the vault. The drainage district maps. Clayton did not know there had been a drainage district. There had. The Shoal Creek Drainage District, organized in 1916 when the county had tried to tame the bottoms with a system of ditches and tile. The district had surveyed every farm along the creek in detail. Elevation, soil, water flow, where the wet ground was and where it wasn't. The district had gone broke in the 1930s and dissolved. But the maps had been filed and never moved. Eunice brought up a flat leather portfolio, tied with cloth tape gone gray. Inside were linen-backed survey sheets, hand-drawn, dated 1916. Clayton found his quarter section on the 4th sheet. And there it was, the North 40, drawn in fine ink, with the high western spine marked in contour lines and the wet bend along the creek shaded and labeled in a surveyor's careful hand. Subject to standing water. Tile recommended. The 1916 map showed exactly what the cooperative's map did not. The field was not flat. The straight-line route ran directly through the wettest, deepest, worst draining ground on the whole 40. Clayton paid Eunice's office 50 cents for a certified copy. She made it herself on the courthouse copier and stamped it and signed it. Clayton drove home with a 65-year-old map on the seat beside him like a passenger. He did not call the cooperative. He understood that a map alone proved nothing to a company that had already drawn its line. He needed to turn the map into a reason an engineer would have to answer. So he did the work the engineers hadn't. He spent the back half of July walking the field with a soil probe and a notebook. The probe was a steel rod with a T-handle, 4 feet long, marked in inches. He pushed it into the ground every 100 feet along the staked route, wrote down where it slid easy and where it hit, and where it came up wet. He found the water table at 22 inches in the bend. 22 inches. The cooperative meant to trench to 40, 18 inches into standing water. He did it in the early mornings, before the heat, walking the staked line with the probe over his shoulder like a rifle. 11 readings, 1 at each stake, then more between them. At the west end, up on the spine, the probe went the full 4 feet and came up dry and clean, smelling of nothing but dirt. At the bend it stopped at 22 inches and came up dark and slick and smelling of the creek. He read it the same spot 3 mornings running to be sure it wasn't a fluke of one wet week. It held. 22 inches, 23, 21. The water was there to stay. It had a season, and the season was most of the year. He marked it all on a copy of the 1916 map. His probe readings beside the surveyor's contour lines, 65 years apart, and they agreed exactly. The wet ground was where it had always been. The engineers had drawn a trench straight through a place where, every wet spring, the water sat 18 inches above the bottom of the line they intended to bury. A buried electric feeder, Clayton learned at the library in Hamilton, did not like standing water. Splices failed. Insulation degraded. A line laid in a seasonal water table was a line that would fault, and a faulted buried line meant digging up the trench to find it. Through his field, again and again, for as long as the line lived. Clayton put it all in a folder. The certified 1916 map. His probe notebook. A page of figures comparing the two. A short letter, 3 sentences, typed by Margaret Birch on the Underwood that had been her mother's. The letter did not threaten anything. It said the proposed route crossed a documented seasonal water table at 22 inches, that the trench depth of 40 inches would place the line below standing water, and that the cooperative might wish to review the enclosed survey before proceeding. He mailed it to the cooperative's chief engineer, not the right-of-way agent, the engineer. A man named Harold Vance, whose name Clayton found on the bottom of the route map Lyles had left on his table. Then he waited. The neighbors heard, the way they did. Some thought he was a fool to fight the co-op. The co-op was the co-op. It brought the power. You didn't win against it. Clayton's neighbor to the south, Verl Stutzman, said as much over the fence one evening. Said the line would go where the line would go, and Clayton would take his $1,100 and be glad of it. Clayton said he might. Did not say anything about the folder in the mail. A man from the Grange asked him at the elevator what he thought he was going to do. Fight engineers with a paper from before the Depression. Clayton said the ground hadn't moved since the Depression. Neither had the water. The man laughed. Clayton let him. It was the same at the feed store and the church lot and the coffee counter at the cafe in Kingston. The talk was that Birch had gone stubborn over a strip of dirt, that he'd spent 3 afternoons in the courthouse basement chasing a paper instead of signing a check. A younger farmer said it was the kind of thing an old man did when he had more pride than sense. The remark got back to Clayton. He didn't answer it. He had farmed the bottom 34 years, and he had learned that a field told the truth slower than men did. But it told it longer. What none of them knew was the part that mattered. The 1916 map and his probe notebook agreed to the inch. The wet ground was where the surveyors said. The engineers were wrong about the one thing they were sure of, and being wrong about water in a buried line was not a small thing. Clayton kept that to himself. A man who has the goods doesn't need to show his hand at the elevator. 3 weeks passed. No answer. The trenching was set for the 2nd week of September. Clayton began to think the folder had gone into a drawer like his own letters had, unread, the way a big thing ignores a small one. August wore on. The corn in the bend tasseled and set ears, deep green, the best stand on the place, standing right where the line was staked to cut it. Clayton walked it most evenings. He had done everything he knew how to do. The map was certified. The probe readings were written down. The letter was mailed to the right man. There was nothing left but to wait, and waiting was the hardest farming there was. Margaret asked him once if he thought it would work. Clayton said the map was right. Said being right and being heard were 2 different things. Said he'd find out which one the co-op cared about. The answer came on the 28th of August. Not a letter, a car. 2 cars. Harold Vance, the chief engineer, and a younger man with a transit and a rod. Vance was near 60. Had built lines in 19 counties. He did not spread a map on the kitchen table. He asked Clayton to walk him to the field. They walked the staked route. Clayton carried the soil probe. Vance carried the certified 1916 map, which he had brought with him, folded into his shirt pocket. At the wet bend, Clayton pushed the probe down. It went 22 inches and stopped in water. He pulled it up wet and handed it to Vance without a word. Vance looked at the dark line on the steel, looked at the contour shading on the 65-year-old map, looked at the bend of the creek and the lay of the ground, and the place where the line was staked to go. Vance was quiet for a while. Then, he said the engineering had been done off the county quad sheet. Flat data. Said no one had walked it in the spring. Said the 1916 survey was better ground truth than anything in his office. He told the young man to start shooting grades along the western spine. The line moved. All of it, 11 stakes pulled and reset along the high, dry, firm western edge of the field, where the soil was thinner and the corn made less, and Clayton lost a strip he could afford to lose instead of the heart he couldn't. The new route was 240 feet longer. It cost the cooperative more pipe, more trench, more labor. Vance approved it anyway. A line laid in dry ground was a line that wouldn't fault. Over 30 years it was cheaper, even at 240 feet longer, than a line that had to be dug out of a wet field every few springs. Vance did not apologize. Engineers don't much. But before he left, he asked Clayton where he'd found the drainage map. Clayton told him. The courthouse vault. Filed in 1916. Never moved. Vance wrote it down, said his office would start pulling the old district surveys for every bottom ground route in the region. Said they were better than the quad sheets. Said it like a man who had learned something and didn't mind admitting the half of it that was useful. The trench went in along the western spine in September. Clayton watched them dig. The backfill settled some that winter, the way he'd warned, but on the high dry ground it didn't matter. Nothing drowned, nothing starved. The strip grew thinner corn the next year and the year after, but the heart of the North 40, the deep black bend along the creek, was never touched. It made 128 bushels an acre in 1982. 141 in 1985. He kept the numbers, the way Margaret had taught him to. The strip along the spine lost maybe 12 bushels an acre to the settled trench in a wet year. Across the 30-foot easement that came to a loss he could measure in a single wagon, not a season. The bend, untouched, kept making 60 and 70 bushels more than the upland, year after year, exactly as it had before the orange flags. Over the first 10 years after the line went in, Clayton figured the moved route saved him better than $11,000 in corn that would have drowned in a wet trench through the bottom. The map that cost him 50 cents had been worth more than that an acre. The cooperative paid him $1,400 in the end. $300 more than the first offer for the longer easement on the poorer ground. Clayton took it. The money was never the point. The point was the field. Verl Stutzman never said much about it. But 2 years later, the gas company came surveying for a pipeline through Verl's place, straight across his own bottom ground, and Verl drove to Clayton's before he drove to the courthouse. Wanted to know how a man found the old maps. Clayton drew him a route to the vault on the back of a feed receipt. Eunice Tharp, he said. Ask for the drainage district. Tell her Birch sent you. Verl found his own 1916 sheet, his own wet bend, moved his own pipeline. Word of it spread the way real things do in a county. Quiet, farmer to farmer, over fences and at the elevator. Not many used it, maybe a dozen over the years. But the ones who did kept their best ground. The courthouse clerk learned to expect them. Eunice kept the leather portfolio on a low shelf where she could reach it without the step stool. Clayton Birch farmed the North 40 until 1996. Retired at 76. Sold the place to a grandson who'd gone to the university for agronomy and come home anyway. The young man knew about soil maps, the modern kind, the satellite kind, layered on a screen. His grandfather showed him the other kind, the leather portfolio, the linen sheets, the wet bend drawn in ink by a man dead before either of them was born. The grandson keeps the certified copy framed. In the farm office, above the desk, the buried line still runs along the western spine. 40 years now, never faulted, never dug up. Dry ground, like the old map said. Clayton drove the field road once in 2003, an old man in a younger man's truck. The corn in the bend stood tall and even, deep green, exactly where the engineers had once meant to cut it. He didn't get out, didn't need to. The company drew its line with the newest map they had. An old one drew it better. It had been right since 1916. It was still right. The ground had never moved, and neither, in the end, had the line they tried to put through it.